This is an NBC News special report. Here's Lester Holt.
Good day. We're coming on the air with breaking news about President Biden's son, Hunter, after he became the first offspring of a sitting president to be found guilty of a crime. Special counsel David Weiss, who has brought the case against Hunter, is set to speak any moment now. It was just hours after a jury found the president's son guilty of 3 felony charges tied to his possession of a gun while using drugs, along with how he got the gun. Meanwhile, President Biden is set to speak later this hour at a previously scheduled event about gun violence. He issued a statement about his son's guilty verdict saying, quote, "I will accept the outcome of this case and will continue to respect the judicial process as Hunter considers an appeal. Jill and I will always be there for Hunter and the rest of our family with our love and support. Nothing will ever change that." Let's bring in NBC's Ryan Nobles now, who's outside the courthouse in Delaware. He's been covering this trial since the beginning. Ryan.
Yes, Lester, we're actually outside of the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Wilmington, less than a mile from the courthouse where this case played itself out. And we are waiting for that statement from Special Counsel David Weiss, who's been the U.S. Attorney that's presided over the Hunter Biden investigation and presided over this particular trial, to hear what Weiss has to say about this verdict. We do not expect Weiss to answer any questions from the reporters that are assembled in this building behind me, but we could get some insight into what are the next stages of this special counsel's office, which of course does have another trial planned for later this fall, another trial related to Hunter Biden and tax evasion. But I do want to share with you some responses from the legal team and from Hunter Biden himself about this jury verdict. I know you read President Biden's statement, but Hunter Biden also put out a statement just a few minutes ago, and he said, "I am more grateful today for the love and support I experienced this last week from Melissa, my family, my friends, and my community, that I am disappointed by the outcome. Recovery is possible by the grace of God, and I am blessed to experience that gift one day at a time." And so what you see here in the statements that are released by the president, by his legal team, by Hunter Biden himself, they are very much staying away from attacking the judicial process here. They aren't attacking the special counsel. They're not attacking the prosecutors. They're showing respect for the judicial system itself, but they are leaving open the possibility. In fact, they are leaning into the idea that they will attempt to appeal this case moving forward throughout the court system. And the Abby Lowell, the defense attorney in this case, has said repeatedly that he does believe that there is a Second Amendment issue related to this case, that the idea that someone would not be able to purchase a weapon even if they are an active drug user is something that is in violation of the Second Amendment, and is something that perhaps even the Supreme Court may have to weigh in on. He actually asked for the case to be dismissed on those grounds. The judge rejected that request. So there is the possibility, as this makes its way through the appellate system, that higher courts will actually ask that question, or answer that question, I should say, as it relates to the Second Amendment and how this case plays itself out. As for what comes next for Hunter Biden, you see in the statements from both the president, from Hunter Biden himself, this is an individual that still views himself as an addict in the process of recovery. He has been in recovery for several years now. It's important to point out that as he has gone through this legal process, he has been required to take drug tests on a regular basis. And so he feels as though he is on the back end of this struggle with addiction that he's had for some time. And there's always been a risk, a concern that the rigors of this legal process would put him in a position where he may be tempted to relapse. And so that's why you see him leaning into this idea of his recovery, that his recovery is important to him, and it's also a high priority. And it is also one of the reasons, Lester, that we saw so much support from the Biden family over the course of this trial. His aunts and uncles in the courtroom, his children in the courtroom with him at times. His wife never left his side. And of course, the most prominent face in that courtroom was the First Lady herself, Jill Biden, who was in the courtroom 5 of the 6 days. The only day she missed was when she traveled to France for the observance of D-Day's anniversary, and then actually returned to France the next day to be there for the state visit. Just a sign of how important the Biden family felt it was to support Hunter Biden as he went through this process. So, Lester, we'll wait to hear what David Weiss has to say about the next steps. I imagine he will also give his opinion as to whether or not this case will stand as it moves through the appeals process. But this is obviously an individual in the special counsel, David Weiss, who's taken a lot of heat from both the right and the left. The right-wing Republicans have accused him of giving Hunter Biden special treatment throughout this process. They called the initial plea deal that both sides had worked out a sweetheart deal. And then they've also accused him of not looking further into Hunter Biden's background, his foreign business dealings, his connections with China and a Ukrainian energy company, saying that there are more charges that exist that the special counsel could investigate. But then he's also gotten quite a bit of criticism from the left as well, saying that under normal circumstance, a person who wasn't the son of the president of the United States would never have been brought up on charges like these all by itself, and that in the tax case, which is scheduled to be heard in the fall, that in normal cases, a first-time offender, if they pay back the taxes with restitution and with interest, normally charges like this go away, but yet they are proceeding with this legal process. So David Weiss has found himself kind of caught between that political push and pull and has attempted to try and stay above the fray. One of the reasons that the Attorney General Merrick Garland moved him into special counsel status was to attempt to remove any kind of political underpinnings to this process. And that's why David Weiss has had complete carte blanche to decide how to move forward with this case. So Lester, we'll have to see what David Weiss says here about this case and what comes next when we hear from him in the next couple of minutes.
Absolutely. We'll certainly switch back to you when he begins to speak. Let's bring in our senior legal correspondent, Laura Jarrett, and NBC News legal analyst, Danny Savalos. Laura, I'll begin with you. Should this case be viewed in isolation or in the scope of all the other potential legal blowback he's facing?
I think you have to do it both and. So I think you have to understand that this is not the end of his legal problems. He has a long road ahead of him, both in this case and the case that we've talked about that's coming up in September. On this case, he's signaling that he's going to consider an appeal. That will not be an easy road. At first, he has to get sentenced. Only then can he appeal, usually around 30 days, 60 days after. So that's going to take quite a while. Right in the heat of the November election, potentially he would be engaging in that type of appeal, and he has to have the grounds to do so. He can't just do it on anything. He has to find a legal hook to do that. You've heard Ryan suggest potentially challenging the statute itself. Again, that kind of process would take months, and it would not be easy. As for the tax crimes that he's facing, the alleged tax crimes, those are 9 different counts for tax evasion, essentially saying he was spending his money on all kinds of things except for his taxes, on cars, on homes, lavish spending, not paying his taxes. The defense on that score, Lester, has said, look, yes, it was a lot of money to the tune of $1.4 million, but he eventually paid it all back. In the eyes of the law, it doesn't matter that he paid it all back. I think that it is at least plausible that his attorneys have to be advising him to think about what a plea would look like. I am not in the room for those discussions. I don't have any reporting to suggest that they're telling him to do it, but you have to imagine it's at least on the table, given what happened today, given what he's facing with this case and the other one in combination. It has to at least be under consideration.
Danny, can you do a plea at the same time where you're essentially pursuing an appeal?
Sure you can. In fact, sometimes you can consolidate your cases, which can be better for sentencing, and you want to try to do that sometimes to avoid getting a criminal history so that each conviction is considered the first. The important thing for Hunter Biden is as soon as he's sentenced in this case, he will have a criminal history. And for sentencing guidelines, that vaults you into another category for sentencing purposes. Because in the federal system, sentencing is a function of the offense gravity, how bad it is, what you did was, and then your criminal history. Right now, Hunter Biden is a category 1. He's got 0 criminal history, but as soon as he's sentenced, he becomes someone with a criminal history. And that is not a good place to be within the federal sentencing guidelines.
All right, let me bring in our senior Washington correspondent, Hallie Jackson. Now, how is the verdict playing politically? I know there have been some statements flying about.
We are getting more and more reaction on this, Lester, as the hours and the minutes have passed since that verdict came down. Notably, of course, from former President Trump, Hunter Biden's father's political opponent in the November election here. And the Trump campaign is railing against what they see as essentially an investigation that did not go far enough, saying it is nothing more than a distraction from what they describe as the real crimes of the so-called, again, their words, Biden crime family here, saying that this all comes down to November 5th. That, of course, is Election Day. We have also heard from the Republican head of the Oversight Committee in Congress, Congressman Comer, who says that while this is an important step, essentially, it still does not go far enough. And that seems to be so far the theme, based on even my phone conversations with some Republican strategists in the last maybe hour since we last spoke when this conviction came in here, Lester. I would say a couple of things here. First of all, there is a world in which, for perhaps some persuadable voters, when former President Trump rails against the weaponization of the Justice Department against him, there could be an argument, right, that somebody could make to themselves that Hunter Biden, the president's son, was just convicted by that same Justice Department here on felony counts. The other side of the coin here is that for Democrats railing against a convicted felon, as they describe him, and former President Trump, who of course has been found guilty on those felony counts, now you have the president's son also convicted on felonies. All of this said, though, Lester, stepping back, big picture, one thing I've heard in some of my conversations in the last little bit is a huge question mark on whether this is actually going to move voters. In other words, this may be a data point that people are aware of, that they understand, that they know that Hunter Biden has been now convicted on these charges, but does it matter as much to them as, let's say, the price of chicken breast at the store, or how they're going to make sure that their kid ends up getting through school? Those bread and butter issues that we know are consistently driving voters to the polls and will be, they say, come November. Inflation and the economy, and then issues related to the border and immigration, that those consistently rank higher when we look at some of these numbers from people. The vast majority of people, based on some surveys that have been done over the course of the last 6 or 8 months, suggest that they believe Hunter Biden has been treated fairly. Now, I should note this was before the trial began. This is not super recent. That just simply doesn't exist in reputable polling. But that does give you a sense, I think, of where folks are on this front, Lester, at least at the moment.
Yeah, Hallie, thanks very much. And the White House, the president specifically, walking a very narrow and careful line through all this. Let's bring in our White House correspondent, Aaron Gilchrist. Do we expect to hear more from the president beyond that statement we already saw this morning?
Well, Lester, the president is scheduled to leave the White House here any moment now. As a matter of fact, he is supposed to be giving the keynote speech at an event not far from here, a gun safety event at a hotel here in town. You can see the stage is all set up for him to speak there at the bottom of the hour. It's a question still whether he might say more about all that's unfolded today as it relates to his son, Hunter. We know that in the past, the president has made it a point not to say much since his son was indicted last year on these gun charges. And so today, whether he says more is yet to be seen. We know, obviously, as you noted at the beginning of this broadcast, that the president put out a statement saying, as he has said in the past, that he loves his son, that he supports his son, that he and the First Lady are proud of who their son has become, referencing really his ability to fight through a drug addiction and to, as the president said in his statement, come out on the other side. But he also said that he was willing to accept the outcome of this case, that he was not going to interfere in any way in what the Justice Department is doing as it relates to prosecuting his son. And he said he would respect the judicial process going forward should his son decide to appeal the verdict that we all learned about today. As far as answering questions related to his son, we know that the president has not gone to great lengths to give any detailed responses. He was in France last week for the D-Day commemoration, and during an interview with another news organization, he did say, just answering yes to questions about whether he would not pardon his son and whether he would respect the outcome of this jury decision. And so that may be the extent of what we hear from President Biden on this topic, although, Lester, of course, as he begins to speak at the bottom of the hour, we'll be listening closely to see if he says something directly or indirectly.
Well,
Lester?
And here we go. Here's the special counsel now meeting the press.
Good afternoon. My name is David Weiss. I'm special counsel. Earlier today, Hunter Biden was convicted of 2 counts of lying on a form submitted to a federal firearms dealer about his addiction or use of crack cocaine and possessing a firearm while a user or addict. There have been 2 overarching themes emphasized by the prosecution during trial: this defendant's illegal choices and the rule of law. First, while there has been much testimony about the defendant's abuse of drugs and alcohol, ultimately, this case was not just about addiction, a disease that haunts families across the United States, including Hunter Biden's family. This case was about the illegal choices defendant made while in the throes of addiction, his choice to lie on a government form when he bought a gun, and the choice to then possess that gun. It was these choices and the combination of guns and drugs that made his conduct dangerous. Second, no one in this country is above the law. Everyone must be accountable for their actions, even this defendant. However, Hunter Biden should be no more accountable than any other citizen convicted of this same conduct. The prosecution has been and will continue to be committed to this principle and to the principles of federal prosecution in carrying out its responsibilities. I want to thank the jury for their service. There are few civic responsibilities more important than jury service. 15 Delawareans came to court each day and performed their responsibilities in a professional and conscientious manner. We thank them. I want to thank Derek Hines, Leo Wise, and the entire special counsel team. I am so proud of this group of attorneys, agents, and litigation professionals. This is a difficult assignment. These folks have been working 7 days a week for the last couple months, litigating a variety of issues in district and appellate courts on 2 coasts. They have given their heart and soul to this work. They represent the best that public service has to offer. I am incredibly grateful. Finally, I want to thank Attorney General Garland for providing the support necessary to fulfill our mission, ensuring that we have the independence to appropriately pursue our investigations and prosecutions. As you know, we have additional trials and investigative work to be done. So I will not entertain questions at this time. Our work continues. Thank you for your consideration. Thanks.
We've heard from jurors asking, Mr. Weiss, would you entertain a plea deal in the California case? I'm a witness to Joe Biden being a criminal.
Special counsel David Weiss taking no questions after that brief statement, making it clear that in his view this was not about a drug addiction. This was about bad choices that Hunter Biden made. He also went to lengths to point out that this was no more that Hunter Biden is being held no more accountable than anyone else would. We want to go back to Ryan Nobles right now. Ryan, what's that up to you?
Yeah, there's a couple things, Lester. I think you're right to point out that he leaned into this idea, the kind of the big elephant in the room, that they were conducting a historic trial here, dealing with the child of a sitting president of the United States, something that had never been done before. And he basically responded to the criticism on both ends of this, saying that, first of all, no one is above the law. Just because he's the president's son doesn't mean that he gets some sort of special treatment. But that even took it a step further and said, just because he is the president's son doesn't mean that we have to look at this with a bit more scrutiny than we would the average citizen. That he and his office worked very hard to look at the facts of the case and work toward a conviction based on those facts and nothing else. The other thing that stood out to me was he talked about the work that his team had to put into this and what a difficult assignment it was, not just because of the facts of the case and the collection of evidence and everything along with that, but also the intense amount of scrutiny that Leo Wise and Derek Hines, the 2 U.S. attorneys that were tasked with prosecuting this case, were under on a daily basis. He said they were working 7 days a week to make that happen. And he described them as representing the best that this office has to offer. He also specifically mentioned the name of Attorney General Merrick Garland, who has really wanted to stay as far away from this investigation as possible. And he thanked Garland for giving him and his team the independence necessary to prosecute this case without any sort of political interference. And that's, of course, something Republicans have been very critical about. They feel like Garland has been too involved in this process. Weiss has stated numerous times that he has had the ability to bring charges in this case, to do whatever he needed to as it relates to the investigation without any kind of intrusion from the Attorney General's office. And that was even before he was named special counsel. And then finally, and this was something that he said very subtly, Lester, but I think it's important, when he explained why he wasn't going to take any questions, he said that we have additional trials and what he called additional investigative work to do. That would suggest that while they are still continuing on, specifically with the tax evasion trial, that doesn't necessarily mean that they've closed all the other investigative doors as it relates to Hunter Biden, and they are going to leave open that possibility that other charges could potentially be brought if that evidence is brought in front of his prosecutor. So it was a very short statement. He didn't take many questions, but we did learn quite a bit from David Weiss there.
We did
Lester.
indeed. All right. Ryan Nobles, thank you. That concludes this NBC News special report. We'll have much more ahead on our streaming network, NBC News Now, online at NBCnews.com, and a full wrap-up when I see you back here for NBC Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt in New York. Good day, everyone.